I was sitting in a virgin forest and I was like, wow, why is there a road through a virgin hemlock forest in the Adirondacks? And I knew from being in the scouts that if you want to affect change on something, work from within the system. And so I learned how to, or I got into the built environment, learned how and why we build the infrastructure that we do, and supporting the federal government and then later DC government, really used scientific method to develop a systems-based approach to understanding how we can quantify the variables of sustainability, not just build one living building challenge where it's like zero energy, carbon, water, and waste. That's a one-off project. Hey, that's great. Glad you did a really cool thing. But like building envelopes, if you do this, this is how it scales.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Renewable Rides. I'm Gareth, and today we're going to have a great discussion with Mike Dieterich, who is a fractional sustainability leader and has some incredible stories and insights from his global travels, adventures, and from his career, where he worked at startups, in the government, and also led the Zero Carbon North American Roadmap at AstraZeneca. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
Great to have you on. We always start, Mike, with what are you passionate about?
I grew up between a cornfield and a cow pasture, so I still love the outdoors. Just this past weekend, I did a backpacking trip up in the Cascade Mountains outside Seattle. So just getting out into the mountains, swimming at Alpine Lake, hiking, and then with living in Seattle, it's great because you can bike everywhere. So I'm also a pretty avid road biker. So that's it's like my personal passion, but like I also really love traveling and seeing the world, like, you know, not just the wilds in my backyard, but all around the world. So been to 7 continents, and, you know, part of that is like digging into the human and cultural experiences, trying all the different foods that you don't get locally. And all of that really connects with sustainability, like inside and outside of my life, like professionally and personally, just seeing all those transformations that are happening in ecosystems that I've been in as a kid and seeing as an adult, and then just integrating all of those things together. So like, I'm like passionate about like the planet Earth.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Where do you think that comes from, Mike? Do you know, was that something that your family instilled in you? Was it natural in like curiosity? Where do you think that interest came from?
I mean, yes, right? It's like there's this one thing where people ask like, what's your favorite tree? I don't know if you've ever gotten asked that question. No. Like growing up as a kid, I mean, I used to walk barefoot all summer, and like I still have like a really wide foot base. Like, yeah, you know, you can fit my fingers between my toes. It's like, and that goes just from being barefoot as a kid. But there was this one pear tree in a hedgerow, like on the way back to this river behind, like the house. My closest friend was 8 fields away. And you just see wildlife doing different things. And it's like, well, why does the ecosystem do this? Why is there a marsh here? Like, why are these trees doing that? And I just like wanted to understand what was happening in the world around me. And in the Boy Scouts, we would go hiking, and one hike in the Adirondacks on top of a mountain, it was like dead quiet on top of a fire tower. And I was like, this is one of the coolest things ever. There's like no noise, because finding in the world today silence is actually, it's endangered. Silence is an endangered species. And it just mesmerized me. And so just exploring to find those really unique places in the world is just a culmination of my lived experience, I think.
I love how most people grow up saying my friend's 3 blocks away, or in my case, growing up in England, it would be like take a left at the pub or right at the pub. It was always with with relation to the local pub. For you, it's like 8 fields away. That's brilliant. In terms of your travels, Mike, have you got any favorite destinations or memorable stories that stand out the most?
The one that pops in my head the first is January 1st, 2020. I was inside the Antarctic Convergence, And so it's all light all year round that time of year in Antarctica. But it's actually something interesting to think about, that everybody on the six continents of the planet celebrates the new year in darkness. Like, just because of like the way the sun is positioned on the planet, unless you're in Antarctica. And it's just this like unique thing that you would never think about. And being down there, the thing that struck me the most was the shades of white. I felt like I was on planet Hoth or something like that from Star Wars. It was just like there was like pink white, yellow white, blue white, white, gray white, blue white. It was just like all these different shades of white, which was it was really neat. I was dreaming about white for 2 weeks after that, because there's just so much snow uh, everywhere, and even the sky was like full of clouds most of the time. So it was really neat.
I'll have to get some notes from you. My wife and I plan to do our 10-year wedding anniversary down there because we visited Ushuaia, Argentina during our honeymoon. So I'll get some notes from you. Well, Mike, let's dig in on kind of what you're up to. What are you doing these days? How did you get here in your professional career? What does that look like right now?
Yeah, and like right now, or just in my career, I started off as an environmental scientist. I think you guys share in that same education background, which is kind of fun. We're in E psi squared, so to speak, or cubed, E psi cubed. Um, and then I was sitting in a virgin forest, and I was like, wow, why is there a road through a virgin hemlock forest in the Adirondacks? And I knew from being in the scouts that if you want to affect change on something, work from within the system. And so I learned how to, or I got into the built environment, learned how and why we build the infrastructure that we do, and supporting the federal government and then later DC government, really used scientific method to develop a systems-based approach to understanding how we can quantify the variables of sustainability, not just build one living building challenge where it's like zero energy, carbon, water, and waste. That's a one-off project. Hey, that's great. Glad you did a really cool thing. But like building envelopes, if you do this, this is how it scales. If you do this with HVAC, this is how it scales. If you do this with lighting, this is how it scales. We can get to zero waste if we take these set steps, because it's a systems-based approach. Did TED Talk. I've talked to the UN a couple different times in U.S. Congress about this is not a climate bill. This is a jobs bill. This is how we create jobs. This is how we scale. I did a little bit of a entrepreneurship journey with Rise Industries, and I was in Houston during Hurricane Harvey. I was like, water came up 4 feet. And that night you would hear this wah, wah, wah. The swamp came back to Houston during Hurricane Harvey. You just heard all these frogs you've never heard. It was only during the hurricane. And if the infrastructure was different, if it was Obama level infrastructure, none of those major highways would have been flooded, which means people would have had a means of egress. And so there's this scalable version inside massive government approaches and industry that everybody can take to mitigate climatic impacts. So I then did that with AstraZeneca, helped them build their zero carbon plan, implement a North American strategy. And now with all this background and knowledge, I'm doing fractional work for various startups, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, to really drive that impact across different sectors, solving multiple problems, and then finding all the fun synergies between them. So, and can definitely take on more clients. So if anybody wants to implement sustainability into a solution or decarbonize, I'm here.
Yeah. Well, and we'll come back to some of the work that you were doing at AstraZeneca, but I want to get a kind of dig in a bit further on. I know you're a systems thinker, so what? Tell us a bit about like what, in that sense, what does sustainability mean, and how does that play out in the built environment with like kind of all these different things being interconnected, and it's not just like, I liked your comment around the way to affect change is from within the system. So how have you done that, and how does that play out?
There's a whole bunch of different approaches that really change the political atmosphere around anything. Like drawing attention to a topic usually happens through protest, and that has its own place so that you have awareness that something is happening. And then to really drive change, sitting within an organization. And when I say an organization, I'm like a government, a business, a corporation, a nonprofit. Sitting inside, you get to have all of those casual conversations with people. There's always corporate goals and objectives. And then if somebody is at the table that has the ability to look at an opportunity and say, hey, this is a large campus. And not only can we reduce energy, which everybody's doing, but why don't we throw in some water conservation projects? If we're going to decarbonize and you look at the cost of natural gas to renewable natural gas, you're going to have a 600 times increase in your costs on gas. Well, so projects that would have had a 20-year payback on steam systems now have like a 2 to 5 year payback. So we can start optimizing these systems in ways that we didn't because of increased costs. And it's just like understanding how things are changing and then using innovation to apply solutions. Like I think a huge opportunity that we have right now is, we're electrifying. So from 2 years ago, Puget Sound Energy looked at their 10-year forecast. They were going to need 400 additional megawatts of power. Well, this year they redid that 10-year forecast. It's now 1,800 megawatts of power over the next 10 years. That's a 400% increase, more than. And some of that's because we're switching from natural gas to electrification. Electric vehicles are on the rise. All these things have the potential to decrease carbon impact, but we also have an opportunity with the increase in data centers, because we're doing all this really fun stuff with computers and AI, use waste heat as an energy source. So, things that we deem a problem can actually become part of the solution. And I think that's a big part of like what I bring to the conversation, and what you can do internally is like, wait, this isn't a problem. This is part of the solution. 180 everything and see how it can solve a problem.
Yeah, I love that, Mike. And I think asking those challenging questions and getting people to just think outside of the traditional response of this is an issue and we need to try and figure out how to, or that's the bear trap and we shouldn't step there. Like, what is the opportunity we should see this as? I think is fantastic. When you were at AstraZeneca and you were working on this zero carbon roadmap, how did that play out? What was your role in that? How did you develop it? What were the successes, lessons learned along the way?
Yeah, like when I started at AstraZeneca, we were like, you need a big win. So one of the first things I did was look at the waste infrastructure. And there's a lot of compost at the Gaithersburg Research and Development Site. And at first, the big hole was a trash, and then there was a smaller compost rectangle, like, half the size of the square, and then some recycle. It was like, if everybody's tossing everything in the big hole, we've just got to relabel that whole compost. And just piggybacking onto that, creating like a symbol, a word, a color association with everything, and a little bit better communications and modifying the infrastructure to meet people where they were. We were able to accomplish at a sister site with that same formula, the first true zero waste certified pharmaceutical location in the world. So there's like, taking a step back and looking at that infrastructure is huge. And so that allowed me to become the U.S. R&D sustainability lead. And so in February of 2020, just when I got back from Antarctica. The CEO, and before the pandemic, rocked the world. The CEO was like, we're going to go zero carbon and scope 1 and 2 by 2025, which like became December 31st, 2025, and scope 3 by 2030. And so some of those objectives have changed slightly, but I asked the global sustainability team, what are you guys going to, like, what's the plan? They're like, well, the sites have to meet these targets. And I was like, all right, sweet. In 6 weeks, I had a working plan, which then was for all R&D and then like biopharma and then manufacturing, because I would just started like reaching out to the organization, to all the different site leads. Hey, what are you thinking? What do you have going on? And then just broke it down into systems: steam, compressed air. Refrigeration always has chlorofluorinated gases, or F gases. Because it's a large industry, you have solvents and other ozone depleting substances, ODSs. Break down those building envelopes, lighting, HVAC. So we had these massive energy, water, waste targets, on track to meet those. And then, can we electrify everything? The answer is no. Like one site can completely electrify in partnership with the utility. They upgrade their transformer, and then complete electrified manufacturing site. Another manufacturing location, the grid is at the utilities having them turn their emergency generators on a 100-degree day because the grid can't maintain the capacity, demand response. And so if we go, these are just random numbers, but from 10 megawatts of power at a site, you electrify, you might be 22 megawatts. Now you have to put in a $80 million transformer, and you have to change all of your equipment, and you're going to put a bigger burden on your local utility. The struggle here was renewable natural gas is an alternative. Landfill gas, however, is only half the carbon impact as fossil natural gas because of how it's processed and purified. But anaerobic digestion helps methane's up 170%. So it was crafting this story then for the C-suite. Methane's up 170% since the Industrial Revolution. Most of that's from anthropogenic sources. The anaerobic digestion of food and animal waste then is carbon negative. We put into the fossil natural gas grid that's all across the United States, use existing equipment, and we can decarbonize right now by removing methane from the atmosphere, displacing fossil carbon, and being able to utilize existing equipment until technology, Atmosphere right now has a heat pump that produces steam. And so it's less energy, electricity, than an electrode boiler. So technology is emerging, and that'll come into the market. So then the question is, if you're not going to replace it before 2030, then we're not going to replace it. We're going to use this as a bridge technology because climate change is a million-piece puzzle. And so building out these things that displace fossil carbon, in addition to help us manage organic waste that we're not managing effectively, solves two problems. And then the byproduct of RNG from anaerobic digestion on a farm, it allows it to also displace fossil fertilizers and bring soil biome back, and then sequester carbon back into the soils, increase nutrients into the crops and crop yields. And so then you have all these co-benefits of decarbonizing two industries at once with something that's already harming the environment. So it's all of that is like crafting this story, talking to leadership about, hey, yes, we can do this. We have to make some changes to like what you would initially just do with electrification, but this helps solve a problem, helps solve global problems, and it helps lead others to a path of success as we transition away from that renewable natural gas in the future. Somebody else can step in and utilize that energy source. It's about storytelling.
Yeah. and to your point, it's all connected, and waste from one process is an input to another. And at AstraZeneca, well, I mean, many of our listeners are trying to impact and affect this type of change within their organizations. Did you? I really liked your point of like one of the first things you did was reach out to the individual sites. And so, how when these programs or these approaches were starting to get implemented, was it like more of a groundswell from the individual site levels and the plant managers or the facilities managers? Was it something that came top down and said, this is going to be a corporate wide approach and here's how we're doing it across the board? Tell us a bit more about how, when it actually came time to implementing things, what was successful?
Well, 2020 was a big year. That was the year of all those massive fires in Australia, if you remember. And so it was, you had all of these cartoon images of fire and ice. And the CEO said, hey, we're a healthcare organization. Our primary objective is to improve people's health. The biggest threat to human health is climate change. And so we need to do our fair share to mitigate our impact on the climate, because that is our mission. And so it was really cool to be part of an organization that was so mission driven. I know big pharma can get, like, people have different opinions about it, but when you see something like that and the money that goes into leading in that space and doing something so quickly, it was definitely top down. The C-suite and the board said, we are doing this. And then working with the different sites, it's how can each one, here's all those systems that we're outlining. How does your site fit into those different systems that we're talking about? And it's really cool to see how people show up. I mean, you're required to, but it was a top-down message, like, hey, we're going this way. But then solving the problem, it's like everything from the boiler room to the boardroom. The boiler room mechanics know what can be done, and they just need to be empowered to be able to affect change in that space, and they will find some efficiencies.
This is the reality, isn't it, Mike? Is that like, no one in business wants to shy away from being more efficient or driving more profits, but it's like the complexity of knowing what to do and when to do it and how to navigate it. And particularly on the energy side, we see like the four big major levers of the energy efficiency stroke fuel switching that you've been talking about, the on-site energy opportunity of generating and storing energy at your facility, taking more control, especially, you were mentioning challenges around utilities not having capacity, being shut down for demand response events, being able to take more control of that. You've got your off-site power purchase agreements or your VPPAs, and then you've got your renewable energy credits. Like, how did you think about that? What are your thoughts on the challenges and opportunities with them, and how did you see that progressing as more and more businesses go on this journey to decarbonize?
Yeah, I was actually just helping a food and beverage client out earlier this week navigate that space. Your first thing to do to decarbonize would be to purchase renewable energy credits, or RECs, or renewable energy certificates, RECs, and then, but that's a cost to add on top of your brown power, right, or your grid mix. What's interesting is virtual power purchase agreements can be cheaper than what you're paying from your utility with the environmental attributes. It tends to be that way. And so migrating to green power and navigating that conversation can actually be a significant cost savings. And so, but it also depends on where you are. So you need to figure out whether you're in a regulated or non-regulated utility. If it's regulated, you'll probably have to go with a green tariff with your local utility, where the cost to buy green power over brown power is 1 to 10%, generally speaking, depending on where you are, as a cost increase. But in 20, here we go, 2020 again. That's a big year, huh? Amazon bought up like almost all the available RECs in like July. And so the cost spiked from being 50 to 80 cents on average per, like a REC is 1 megawatt of power offset. And it went up to $5 to $8. And it ended the year at $3. And that was some of the highest that we've seen. It's since gone down, but because it is a market rate, and as more and more individuals have to or want to buy green power and mitigate their impact on the environment, there's going to be more demand than there is supply of RECs. And so I think it becomes really important to pursue those power purchase agreements. One, it can save you money. It will save you money depending on like where you are. And then it creates a really good story, and it also frees up those RECs for other individuals that have no other option. Like if you're a business and you rent the third floor of a 12-story building, you can't change your power utility for the whole building unless you're putting pressure on them to do so. It might benefit that landlord. Have a conversation, work from within. But you could buy RECs to mitigate your environmental impact, and then you can follow those larger science-based target initiatives.
It's interesting hearing you explain it like that, because I think I just wrote an article a little bit about this, and for me it's that trade-off between do you want someone else to do the work and do the decarbonization, and you buy an outcome, or do you want to do the work yourself and do some of the initiatives you were describing before around fuel switching, electrification, on-site energy optimization, generating, storing your energy, and actually truly investing in your business and making long-term meaningful impact. Like it's a hard trade-off, isn't it? Of, do you want that quick win? There's a lot of pressure on you as a leader to get a quick win, or do you want actually long-term business impacts and outcomes in terms of cost of savings and efficiencies? So, how do you think about those trade-offs as a sustainability leader, and then how do you communicate that with the people who have the purse strings?
Well, I worked on 73 LEED and well certified projects over the last decade, and I've averaged a 17% energy reduction across those projects. Whether you're talking about a large corporation, a smaller building, it averages out to about 17% energy savings. Some, of course, will get like 2%. Some will get a 50% energy savings. You have your outliers, but energy assessments and, an ASHRAE level 2 audit will get you great understanding of how you can improve your overall major systems like HVAC and steam. And then smaller, fun assessments. I mean, they even gave it a fun name. The Department of Energy does a treasure hunt. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. And but it's like fun, because then it's like, oh, you have a gap in your doors, and here's a calculation to tell you how much energy you can save if you close this gap. And like, here's this light here. One of the things that came out of a treasure hunt was putting a Christmas light timer on a pinball machine in the game room. That saved $4,000 a year. Just the things that consume energy just constantly being plugged into the wall. But if you can unplug it, but you put a process in place, that's this stuff can be fun, from finding these small wins and big wins. But there's two different approaches to looking at how to save energy. And so on the campus where we're switching from carbon intensive energy to decarbonized, with the savings that you get from, I was able to identify a 30% reduction in water, a 64% reduction in overall site waste. So not removing as many dumpsters saves you money. We ended up with a 22% energy reduction. So then, instead of having a $5 million a year utility cost increase you're talking about having a decarbonized campus for $50,000 more a year, because we were able to cut all these costs by implementing a whole bunch of projects. So I think like one of the biggest misconceptions is the fact that it has to cost more. If you do it right, if you take time to take a step back and look at what your opportunities are, you'll find a way of mitigating those cost increases. And now you have this green site that's decarbonized, and it barely costs you anything more.
It kind of comes back to the everything's connected piece, and one of the things that we've been it's been great seeing leaders that are impacting this change is looking at not just the fact that they're decarbonizing, but that costs are coming down, and then this component around resilience, which I think is increasing more and more. And I'm curious your perspective on this, but this, or specifically around energy, this resilience and reliability component, we're seeing as like over the last 20 years, we've had a relatively flat kind of U.S. grid load, and now it's starting to ramp up, and all projections, to your point, they're in the Seattle area, 4.5 fold increase projection over the next 10 years, which is going to impact reliability. And we're seeing these on-site systems being able to support through that. But one of the big challenges is how do you quantify that? And I'm curious, has any of your work surrounded around resilience and being able to ride through or maintain operations during outages, or in your case at AstraZeneca, secure materials that maybe would spoil if not treated properly? Because that's another just kind of systems-based approach to this.
Yeah, I mean, you could put on an organic Rankine cycle or a combined heat and power plant to then go into an island mode and operate independently of the grid. But I think like a better story about resilience is post Irma and Maria. I went down to the British Virgin Islands. I did a TED talk down there on resiliency, and it was really interesting to see these large scale field solar, because it was like a Category 5 hurricane that went through, and like the walls of the buildings remained, but like the tin roofs went off. And if you apply a different building technology like ferrous cement, then it becomes one integrated structure, so you're not going to lose that property. The large solar fields were like 80+% devastated, but on a home, you may have lost 15 to 25% of your solar array, so you still could generate power. And so now a colleague of mine is installing down in the Caribbean about 400 to 500 PV plus battery systems a month, because of this resilience of, the grid is not 100% reliable, but we've learned through these storms that if you make a very small tweak to what you're building, in Bermuda, they capture the rainwater because there's no freshwater lens on the island. So the rainwater that falls on their buildings is also their drinking water. And so you can, in that environment, capture your own water, so you can be water independent. You can produce your own energy, and then you have 24 hours of power from renewable sources because the battery backup. So you have 24-hour matching, which aligns with like where the greenhouse gas protocol is going. Small scale thermal gasification of municipal solid waste, or what we often call trash, or in the UK, rubbish. It depends on where you go in the world. That would produce hydrocarbons so that you wouldn't have to import any kind of fuels from off island, which reduces shipping. And with a little bit more intention around EV vehicles, you'd be able to plug and play, so then you can reduce all that local pollution. So, right, resilience can be extraordinarily local. Like the Caribbean islands, they can build their buildings where it doesn't cost more. They have energy and water independence. If there was more intention around growing the crops, which they're already doing, they have more of a steady food supply, and aquaculture can be enhanced. And all of these are just different scaled versions of themselves. We can scale up installing solar panels on all of our buildings. If you shade the southern and western facade of a building, you're going to get an 18% reduction in energy. And if we started doing that everywhere, we reduced these grid impacts that, like, it would stop the heat loading of these massive buildings. And if we stop the heat loading in these massive buildings, and like New York City banned clear story glass high rises, that also creates a better envelope, shrinking the size of the HVAC system. We then can build these resiliencies into these larger districts, and so it's just different. It's like the same, but tweaked and different and scaled in a different way for different climates. And all of these small little changes mitigate these massive impacts that we're seeing, and massive trends in energy consumption. We actually have a whole bunch of engineering solutions that we can pull the trigger on. We just need to start having those conversations. A great example, I know I'm long-winded, a net zero energy office space built in the 1980s. So, it's like C-class office space for anybody who's doing the real estate stuff. And it's consuming, I'm going to round the figures just to make it easier for our conversation, 100 EUI of energy. You do a typical renovation to code built, it gets you to 50 EUI. You put in an extra 15% energy or cost into the building envelope, you now have a 22 EUI. The 22 EUI building that has just an enhanced building envelope is $500,000 cheaper to make net zero, because you put on half the solar panels, which costs more than that building envelope, versus the code built building. And so then in that scenario, you go from a $300,000 to a $150,000 to a $50,000 utility bill. Now you could invest an additional $6 million in enhanced HVAC upgrades, which is like major mechanical efficiencies, which is awesome, 100%. But you only get another 2 EUI out of it, and then you increase the cost of it. So there's this sweet spot in thinking through the problem of, we don't have to overdo our engineering solutions, but passive design can actually benefit us more and have more of an impact. And so now we can build something that's more sustainable at a decreased cost from code built or over engineered, if we just think through the problem. I think that's amazing.
I couldn't agree more. And I think we're firm believers that, reducing your consumption in the first place before you go figure out how you generate to meet your inefficient load is not really necessary. One of the things you were describing on, especially in the Caribbean islands there on resiliency, made me just think of, hopefully this is falling on welcome ears, but of just the resilience of ecosystems in general, in nature, in the wild. And it's because of the distributed nature of them, and not these centralized, but things are happening everywhere, and a disturbance in one spot doesn't destroy the ecosystem. It can flex, and I think that's how our entire energy system is going to eventually evolve, where more things are happening in a distributed manner, largely just because of that resilient nature. So I'm curious. I'd imagine, given all the work and the travels that you've done, and maybe the talks that you gave is kind of along those same lines.
Absolutely. That's also what has been really exciting for me, coming full circle with, 20 years ago, I had to get out of being in nature in order to save nature. And now with carbon credits, because, even if you switch to green power and renewable natural gas from anaerobic digestion, or you fully electrify with green power, your refrigerator, any refrigerator or cooling system, has gases in it, which if they leak, when they leak, impacts the atmosphere, or somebody is driving an internal combustion engine into work, or you hop on an airplane, there's always these residual emissions. And so for organizations to get to zero, you can cap a well and take credit for that as a one-time credit. Like, you stop these emissions from going to atmosphere, you can say how much you've done there. But enhancing the ecosystems globally and bringing back either the Amazon, or biochar is a great example. And thinking through like planting eelgrass and Puget Sound, or even kelp, and bringing back kelp forests. All of these things are going to absorb carbon. You can take credit for that. So now we have corporate dollars that are flowing into nature-based systems. We are figuring out how to best quantify those savings and ensure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. More due diligence and science needs to go into that. But the fact that we're moving in that direction, I think, really affords us a more sustainable future that's in balance with enhancing ecosystems that are either doing well and we can assist them. This is, I think, is a relevant point. When I was driving from DC, where I lived for the last 18 years, to Seattle, I stopped in Wind Cave. One of my buddies was a park ranger there. The black-footed ferret is an endangered species. It gets inoculated it gets immunized against different viruses. The elk get round up every year and assessed for hoof and mouth disease, and the ones that are infected get removed from the major herd. Humans have brought these diseases into a national park, which is supposed to be conserved. So technically hands off. If humans were completely hands off in that ecosystem, all of those species would go extinct, because our actions have caused such an impact that without mitigation to assist those animals in staying healthy, and ensuring that invasive species aren't overtaking the plains and the natural environment, those ecosystems would not exist. And I think the same thing scales out from there with how we accomplish a zero carbon or decarbonized future, is us all working together to figure out how to enhance these natural systems that, we touch 97% of the planet. Well, we need to intervene in reducing that impact at this point. And I'm excited for where we are and where we can go with now having corporate dollars help solve that problem.
Nice. It's a really good way to close out that thought. And we'd love to move into the power surge round and ask you a few closeout questions. You've obviously seen a lot, been around a lot, experienced a lot. If you could be any one technology to have the biggest impact possible, what would it be and why?
I think this actually dovetails into something I think is really fun. Like, what is your collective now? Now, you guys might not be able to answer this right off the bat, but think about it. A group of whales is a pod. You would have a herd of deer. A really fun one is a group of crows is called a murder.
Do you know buffaloes? A crash.
Oh, that's epic. That is epic. So an arborist would be a forest. Mine is think tank, because I'm always solving problems and finding solutions. So like, you guys are my think tank. If we're referring to this podcast today, this is Mike and his think tank. And because of that, like, mine would be smart grids, offering that flexibility, efficiency, and resilience. I think it dovetails into what my collective noun is.
That is awesome. First, we've had that, and I like the build up to it. Mike, you've seen a lot, you've read a lot. What do you have for our listeners as far as any favorite or recommended sources of information, whether it be podcasts beyond Renewable Rides, whether it's newsletters or books or whatever? What are some nuggets that you might be able to share with our listeners?
I mean, everybody has different interests. So if I say a book, might not be relevant. But given that TED Talks, I think, is one of the best digestible forms of information out there. If you are interested in a topic, you can get a 12 to 20-minute debrief on a deep dive on some topic that you love. And if you really like that topic so much, like the Association of Energy Engineers, you're an energy engineer, go to the conference, talk with people there, attend the different sessions, because then you just get to have conversation with other people that are like nerding out about the same thing.
Do you want to give a quick shout out to your TED Talk and what you spoke about, what it's called, where they'd find?
Yeah, the first one was a zero energy water waste future. It was like, I think 10 years ago now, on that work that I did with DC Public Schools on what works and how it scales. And then my second TEDx talk was It's a Time to Rise, which is about the resilience in the Caribbean that I was just talking about.
Nice. I'm definitely going to have to check that one out. I actually grew up on Tortola. And so I've got fond memories of the BVI, spent a couple of years there and love it. And yeah, I'll definitely be checking that talk out. And so, Mike, to close us out, what does this statement look like for you personally or professionally in the context of the global energy transition or sustainability? In my life, I will have been successful when?
Like my tagline generally, like I'm always trying to meet people where they are. So I always am like, help me, help you, help me, help us. So it's really that like I mean, I feel successful with the fact so far that I've been able to affect change on so many projects, and just being able to continue to help us collectively really gets me going.
So good. And if people want to hang out and be a part of your think tank, where do you typically spend your time and energy, social media wise, or where are the best forums to interact with you?
LinkedIn is definitely, I post on there almost every week, either hot takes, interpretations of things that are going on, or events that I'm going to or just have been to. You can get like a debrief on something. So LinkedIn is my best one, Mike Dieterich, and that's diet, the letter E, and then rich, because nobody can, and don't listen to your phone. It will misspell my last name.
Also, you have a website, yourname.com,
Yep.
MikeDieterich.com.
MikeDieterich.com. Yep.
Beautiful. Mike, thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. I think, like you said at the beginning, we're in good company, 3 environmental scientists. Your systems-based approach is, I think, one that more folks need to take on, whether it's how everything's connected, how we get things done within an organization. So really appreciate the time, and look forward to tracking as you continue to make a big impact on the world, or lessen the impact on the world, however you look at it.
Spot on.
Beautiful. Thanks, Mike.
Cheers, Mike.
Cheers.
Hey, Dan. Loved Mike's energy, and I think it almost felt like it was the start of a joke. How many environmental scientists does it take to make the world more sustainable? And what do you call a pod or a group of environmental scientists and sustainability people? But a really enjoyable conversation. Super well-traveled guy, lots of very interesting experiences. And what were your reflections?
For me, and this resonated quite a bit, was just the interconnected nature of everything, and how we really need to be taking a systems-based approach, and not just in the solutions that we look at and the technologies that we consider, but also just within our own organizations, and being sure that we're pulling in all of the necessary stakeholders and the right people. This continues to be a common theme. We heard it from Kristen at GM, and every day when we're working with leaders, it's something that requires a whole group of folks to come together to actually make this happen. So I think it's both the interconnected nature of our systems within the world, but also within our organizations. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think I really liked his answer to his favorite technology. Smart grids. That's the future. That's what we're working on. I think that's the reality of where everything needs to head. We touched on the need for resilience, for sustainability, for having more profitable outcomes. None of that is possible through a centralized ecosystem. I really liked your connection back to nature, because there is no ecosystem in the world that is a single entity that can survive and thrive. And so smart grids bring that more dispatchable, agile, flexible solution that can scale with our adapting needs. And so I really appreciated that. And I think that was the perfect counter to the fact that, his initial response to what do you do to reduce your emissions is go out and buy renewable energy credits. And I think for anyone who follows my Substack will know that I do not agree with that mentality. I think RECs have a role to play, but I think the key to realizing profitable and sustainable outcomes is to do the work and to reduce your energy consumption, and then generate and store as much of your own energy as possible before you then go on to try and offset the remaining emissions. So I think big lesson learned. I think it's a common perception for sustainability leaders who want to get a win. The market is creating new and exciting opportunities to achieve that, while also creating massive positive long-term impact for businesses. So really good discussion. Loved the conversation, loved the energy, loved that you can measure distance in fields. And yeah, Mike's a good guy. Let's go.
Yeah, I appreciate his time.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.